Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this afternoon I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Degnan. You're calling in from Swindon. Brian, how are things down there?
Aye, things in here are quite quiet. Nice, sun's out, but it's still freezing, so it's at least it's dry. So aye, all good down in sunny Swindon.
What's the links between Swindon and Celtic then? Di Canio, Simon Ferry, who else?
Yep, Simon Ferry,
Paul Caddis.
I dare say there's more that'll pop up over the years. It's quite nice though. It's quite because Swindon's not that big, but there's quite a large Celtic following down here, as in most places. But when I first moved, I struggled to sort of find anything to talk to football about because nobody cared about Celtic. And then I randomly was in a pub one day with a Celtic top on, which you can do down here. And some guy shouted from across the bar. He says, "You need to go across the road." And then the pub across the road is where the Swindon Shamrocks, who's a supporters club, meet. And I've been hanging about with you guys since. And so it's good. It's always interesting meeting people from so far afield that just absolutely adore the club the way you do. It's nice, special club though, isn't it? That's why.
It is, yes, and you do have that global appeal wherever you go. If you see the green and white hoops, it is one of those beacons that the person you would hope is one of the good guys. And it's just the two of us today. And I just said before we came on, Brian, that was the cue for a wee song. I'm certainly not going to be singing it. But talking of songs, Ange Postecoglou says that he can take this Celtic side, or he wants to take this Celtic side to another level. Now, I don't know if you're another level fan, Brian. I don't know your musical taste, to be honest with you, mate, but I certainly was not. No. Back in the 1990s. But we are going to be talking about how Ange is already putting in place the building blocks to create something at Celtic that he describes as another level. You were looking, at the weekend there, the performance against St Johnstone, McDermott Park has been historically a difficult hunting ground for Celtic. The pitch itself was obviously an issue at the weekend, but we came away with a convincing 4-1 victory. What did you make of the game overall, Brian?
I thought we played really well. Actually, I thought the scoreline probably flattered St Johnstone a wee bit. Although I will say I thought they actually played quite well. To be fair, I think they were quite aggressive at the start. They looked to create a few chances. I thought they defended fairly well. But it was sort of. It feels like. You feel almost spoiled saying it's more of the same for a Celtic side. But I don't mean that to dismiss how good we've been. It's just it's almost becoming no routine, but you're expecting us to just blow away and attack and play with such football intent. And to play the way we do on that park, I thought was excellent. Mm-hmm. And I think my main takeaway, I was kind of thinking about it, is I know we talked about strength and depth in the bench a lot, but there's a real sort of grit and resilience about the team. Like Jota, I thought, didn't have the greatest game at points, but then had an assist and was actually quite influential by the end. David Turnbull, was it 3 goals and 5 or something like that? 4 goals and 5, something coming off the bench. Mm-hmm. And you're bringing a guy like Matt O'Reilly off to replace Moy, who's again exceptional. And you just think, I mean, Ange talks about being on another level. You think there's still so much more to come. No in terms of performance, but if you look at even the squad, because probably longer term, you're going to replace maybe Joe Hart, you're probably going to add another midfielder, you're going to add these other things, the players up there are going to get better. And we just seem, it's almost second nature. The players, that even when we make changes, you wouldn't know, if that makes sense. Like the play continues, the system continues, and it's kind of remarkable actually. And I don't think, it's like almost a quadruple treble. I think it will take a few years before we actually appreciate what we're seeing at the moment.
That's incredible because there are talks rather. There is talk of a treble this season, so I find that really interesting. So if we break it down a wee bit and start looking at some of the performances that we have, I've also going to got groups of players, Brian, that you have certain players that you think are, even though Ange might argue the point, almost certain starters. That core group: Joe Hart, Carter Vickers, McGregor, probably Kyogo, and then round about that, you've got players who, for example, will be trying to get back in the side. People like, Turnbull, for example, O'Reilly and Abada. Maybe to a lesser degree, Ralston and Bernabei's not quite got in there yet. And then you've got a group of players, I believe, that, and we'll focus on them as well, who haven't really got started yet. And you'd probably throw in Iwata, Kobayashi, Haksabanovic, maybe even after 3 cameos. So I find it really interesting how there's a dynamic being built by Ange Postecoglou, that when you talk about guys like Joe Hart, there's 3 I was reading about this morning. There are 3 players who are coming into the last 18 months of their contract. Joe Hart being one of them, Aaron Moy being another, David Turnbull being the third. The one of those 3 that concerns me a wee bit is probably Turnbull, and how you can convince Turnbull that you're going to stay at Celtic, you're going to get game time. At the moment, it's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard sell for Turnbull, and that sounds pretty ominous. But he's a guy that wants game time at the age of 23. Joe Hart, this might be the final 18 months of his Celtic career. Who knows what's going to happen with Joe Hart? Is he going to have a Buffon style kind of like end to his career? And then Moy, I don't like to at this moment in time think about a Celtic team without Aaron Moy. That's how well he's been playing. But at his age and with 18 months to go, it could well be the final 18 months of his career as well. So you've also got to look at how Ange is constantly replenishing the team and refreshing the side. And I think that he's got a plan that isn't a short-term one. Certainly, it's a medium-term plan he's got, and he's already got those groups in place. And I want to talk about how he can manage those groups and keep all the players happy. I'm going to start off with our top goal scorer, Kyogo Furuhashi. And I'll go back to some comments that Ange made fairly recently when it was raised at a press conference, Brian, about Kyogo's loss of form. And Ange obviously didn't agree with that. He said that he's been fairly consistently brilliant since he came in. And at the weekend, he scores a goal. He does a lot more than that, though. And when you look at this season, he scored 22 and 32. Last season, 20 goals and 33 appearances. If you break it down to the minutes, as a lot of the stats guys like to do, he scored this season a goal every 96 minutes. Last season, it was a goal every 108. If you look at goals and assists this season, he's involved in a goal every 85 minutes. Last season, every 87 minutes. It's an astonishing set of statistics, Brian. And when you also think of the fact that he's seen off Giakoumakis, he's not at the building yet, but he's kind of seen off Giakoumakis. But he brings so much more to the team than just the goals. This is the one point I want to look at. I mean, we talk about a culture in a football team, how big a cultural change it's been for the Japanese players coming in, but how big an influence they've had on the culture of the other players within the dressing room as well.
Aye, it's amazing. I mean, a couple of things to pick up regarding Kyogo. So, I think you hit the nail on the head there, and that how much he offers the team, how much he influences the team apart from the goals. Where I think people were saying it, and I was one of the ones that said it as well, that he dropped form a bit, was that yes, he was scoring the goals, but he wasn't really doing a lot else. And if you look at his performances in Europe, he didn't score at all. So I think it was clear that just because he's scoring goals at this level, he's capable of so much more. And he wasn't. There was a wee dip. He wasn't quite doing it. Now that seems like you're being harsh, and it probably is harsh. But then if you set expectations so high and they drop a bit, it is. I think it's fair to call out. And then you have to also wonder. Obviously, Giakoumakis had said he was wanting to go. So if he was ready to stay and there was no desire to leave, would he have been replaced Kyogo at any point during that time? You don't know. So there's a lot of buts and maybes. So I get Ange's maybe a bit protective over Kyogo, but I don't think it's unfair to call out players that are having a wee dip. It's like Matt O'Reilly, right? Matt O'Reilly, for me, I think he's an incredible footballer. I think he's got unlimited potential, but he's been a wee bit off form, and Aaron Moyes coming in to take his place, which goes to that depth and form. But go back to Kyogo, you're right. I mean, his assist and he's playing the build-up with that pass through, and then the position to run back in and score. He's just an exceptional footballer, and the fact that what I thought was interesting was Ange saying that he thinks he's not even peaked yet. So normally at 28, you would say that's probably a player's like top. But then with the Japanese players starting a bit later, the fact he's not even peaked yet, I think that's going to be terrifying for players playing against him. I mean, there's so much to love about Kyogo. His movement is one of the main things. I think we've said in the past it's almost Larsson-esque in terms of the way he moves and dives about.
Yeah.
he's clinical. He can be a wee bit wasteful at times, but his stats don't lie, right? He is very, very clinical. But I love the fact he's so robust for such a wee guy. He's like 5'7". He's slim. He never shuts a tackle. He charges players down. He puts the boot in. He gets himself about. He's never scared. And actually, his aerial ability is pretty good for his size as well. So we've got a top-class striker there. But the even more exciting thing, if you'll indulge me, is the fact that I fully predict if Kyogo was to go, somebody else is going to come in, such as this sort of fluidity in Ange's squad.
Yeah.
And I think, in years past, the players have been more important than the system or the shape in a way. If you lose a player, you think that's devastating. What's going to happen to the team. Whereas I almost feeling, I hope Kyogo's here for a long time, but you almost feel like if someone does go, the team will keep kind of churning over. Obviously, there's players of certain quality you will worry, but in general, I just think the system's almost stronger than the individual, if that makes sense. And it's probably the first time I can really remember that happening.
Well, absolutely. There's a succession kind of planning about Ange that we're not used to, Brian. You know what I mean? It's like when even the great Martin O'Neill, who I'm going to be very privileged to share a stage with at the end of this month, when he left, the team needed completely overhauled. The job that Gordon Strachan had was a completely different job to the one Martin O'Neill had on his hands. Because obviously O'Neill came in at a time where, Rangers had become the dominant force. Celtic had won one league title since 1988, and that was the stop in the 10th season under Wim Jansen. More of that later, by the way. And what O'Neill did was he completely rebuilt Celtic as a force in domestic football and, almost in European football, taking us to that European final 20 years ago, Brian, in May. And then when Strachan came in, there was a clutch of players there who had aged, obviously. So there was no sell-on value. There'd been phenomenal players for Celtic, but there was no sell-on value to the likes of Neil Lennon, Alan Thompson, even John Hartson and Chris Sutton. As phenomenal as they were at Celtic, there was no sell-on value. And then obviously the wages were an issue as well. So then there was this massive drop. And I think the great example that I've used before, and I read it in Gordon Strachan's book, was that he had the opportunity to sign Craig Bellamy for £5 million. But the deal, the transfer fee, the wages, he used that to sign Zuraski and Nakamura and Boric. All three of those players equated to what it would have cost to bring Bellamy to the club. So the Bellamy was the O'Neill-style player, the O'Neill-style signing, whereas Strachan was doing it a wee bit differently. But what you've got now is you've got Ange, and it's succession planning that should happen in every successful, and I know people don't like us calling football a business, but it is a business. And what you've got there is Giakoumakis leaves. All right, we've already brought in Juranovic leaves. We've already brought in Johnson. And he's buying younger models. Johnson was also at the World Cup, may not have played as well as Juranovic. The team he was playing with wasn't as good as Juranovic's team either. But what Ange's got is he's got that succession in place. And it fills you with a bit of confidence that if and when the final moment does come and Ange goes to manage Australia, another World Cup, or Real Madrid, or whoever he goes to.
Man City, maybe.
Well, whatever happens, and hopefully it's in about 5 years' time, then you know that you've got a really solid foundation there, Brian. I think in the past, a manager's left and it's just been like, let's start again. I mean, we even seen it when Ange came in. The situation Ange faced compared to where we are now, talking about almost having two sides that you could line up, is astonishing in such a short space of time.
There's two massive points here, Paul, and to talk about the second one first, the state of the place when Ange came in. I mean, it's hard to believe that was only 18 odd months ago. It feels like a completely different football club in a way.
Aye, yep.
The operation, the attitude, the culture, the type of play we're seeing, the success we've had in such a short space of time. Like, even if we shared a thing the group recently, and it was the starting 11 for the Real Betis game under Ange. Remember?
Yeah.
I don't think any of them are either still here or with starters. It's quite incredible, that turnaround. But what Ange has done is it's something that I know I've certainly been harping on about it. I think you agree that Celtic should find a coach to fit the club and know the other way about. We shouldn't always change at every time because it It's not going to work. That's why we've got the academy issues we've had for so long, and why we've also had to do these rebuilds after everyone leaves. So the onus now would be on Celtic to maintain this, because what they've got there is a style of play, a system that works, the infrastructure around it. I can't remember the guy's name that came from Benfica, the data scientist. You've got the fitness coach that was there at Tottenham, Mark Law coming in. You've got all these guys in the background now. You've got the coaching staff, the B team set up, all geared for success, playing a certain way. They've got the player modelling thing that they've tried to do for years that Ange has finally got right, in my opinion. I know people say he's done it a different way. I think he's done the same thing, but much better than everyone else. If you look at getting players in, developing them, selling them, which we've been doing for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got all that in place, if Ange goes, because remember, he came in alone, so he's going to leave alone. So everything else is still there. So you just need to find someone to take that place. And in theory, you should keep, you might not have the same success, might be slight tweaks, but you do the Dortmund mould, you do the Leipzig mould, you do even Brentford, similar idea. You do this sort of player modelling system with the infrastructure in place, and it can only be a bright future. But the onus has to be on Celtic, because what they can't do if Ange does go is panic and get some ex-manager for the EPL in and change everything again, because then you're just right back, and you can't. As Ange spoke about it, about the Champions League, and he says incremental increases year on year.
Mm-hmm.
You make it a little bit better year on year, but only you do that if there's consistency, or else you're always resetting. And if you're always resetting, you can't move forward. Short-term success, but long-term failure. And I think actually now we've got a really good balance.
I'd agree with that. I think also I always look back, Brian, to the old boot room mentality. Now, Celtic had that in the past, and it's always attributed to Liverpool, isn't it? Back in the right back to Bill Shankly's days, going through their list of managers, whereby there were people who were already at the club and they already knew what they called the Liverpool way back then, and there was this succession of managers that already had everything instilled in them, Brian, in terms of the culture, the heritage of the club, the style of play. And, you know, that continued for years. You know, Shankly, Paisley, Fagan, Dalglish, Ronnie Moran was part of that team, as was Roy Evans, who later became the manager. But when they stopped doing it, they stopped having success. It just so happens Souness went to Liverpool and the boot room was tore up. And it showed you how long it took them to get success again, obviously. You know, they had to wait until Jurgen Klopp came fairly recently. I know he's been at the club for 7 years, you know, to get success again. But Liverpool had a formula, and they threw the formula in the bin. And obviously, you've seen what happened. Celtic had a formula, and their formula was similar to that, you know, where you look at the boot room mentality and the fact that when Jock Stein was named the Celtic manager, he was the 4th manager in the history of the club, Brian. The 4th manager. That's astonishing, right? Now, I know we had Willie Maley, who was the manager, I think, officially for about 52 years, which is incredible. It's unbelievable. And then, obviously, we had the thing where it was generally a Celtic captain or player, at least, that would be the manager of Celtic. So we did have that in place. What we've got now with Ange, I look at the situation where he is slowly but surely, like you say, starting to build his own backroom team. Harry Kewell's part of that. And you just hope that there's a flawless transition, you know, if and when that happens. What's the point of going out and getting something or a name that's hot at that moment in time who doesn't fit the system that Ange has been building to take us to this other level that we're talking about today? Kyogo, one final question on the Kyogo thing. I love looking at, obviously, the history books and who's played games, so many games, and the goals. I love all that kind of stuff. And at the moment, he's scored 42 goals in 65 games for Celtic. And I find it interesting that his previous club, Vissel Kobe, I think that's how you pronounce it, he only scored 49 in 111. So he's far more prolific for Celtic than he had been for his previous club. But I'm going to ask you the question. He hit his 22nd goal there yesterday. How far can he take it, Brian? Because I was looking this morning, we potentially have 18 games to play. I would expect Kyogo to play most of them, start most of them as well. How many more goals do you reckon? 30? Dare I say even 40, do you think?
I would have said 40. I think if you look at he's averaging nearly a goal a game anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not outlandish to suggest. And then you're going to games where he scores a couple at a time. So he should even out. I think he should aim for that. I don't think there's any limit on what he can do. And remember, obviously, cup competitions as well. So we'll see how that progresses. So there's every chance to do well, and I think it ties into the point I said earlier about what Ange said about Kyogo, and that he's not hit his peak yet. And if you look at those stats, that confirms it, right? He's getting better.
Yeah.
Now, for us, a 28-year-old player for Scotland playing, you might think he's not going to get too much better, maybe a couple of years. But his goal seems to be getting better and better and better, which can only bode well for us. And again, the interesting thing always to remember, I think, is as good as Kyogo is, will have to match that and then make him better. And if he doesn't, if it's somebody else in to keep doing it. You look at Greg Taylor, we've spoke about a bunch. I have to think Bernabe coming in has made Taylor better. Because Greg Taylor's been exceptional this season. He really, really has. And you can see he's so confident with the passes, the wee dink passes he's trying now, which were never really part of his game. He's looking at it, he was in the right wing at one point yesterday. And he's dinking it over. He's just clever. And I think that's because he knows if he drops form and Bernabe plays well, he's out. And I don't think Ange plays favourites. Someone made a really good point in the comments. I didn't catch their name, so apologies. But on the sort of the thing I said about the coach should match the club and know the other way about, he said he gets that, but obviously Ange completely changed. And I think it's right. I think Ange gave us our Celtic identity back in a way.
Yeah.
This guy from across the world, no Celtic affiliation, actually is the most Celtic-minded manager we've had in terms of the culture and playing a Celtic way for a long time. And I suppose my point is, he came in and changed it, and now we have to keep it. So there's no point in getting, a Sean Dyson and playing long balls into the box where Everton have done. You've got to stick to that say and build on it, or you're not going to go any further. And if we actually takes it to another level, I think we've speculated in the past about if or when Ange may go, and he's simply not going to be there forever because no one is, right? But I think he leaves no for EPL money, which I suppose we'll talk about later, EPL money, or some big name club. I think he leaves when he's achieved a real legacy at Celtic, more than just winning domestically. I think he's desperate to make his mark in Europe. And I think it comes to a place of ego, because he's very self-confident, but a place of Celtic deserve this. This is where they should be.
Yeah.
This is my job. This they've asked me to do. I need to do it. And I think that's so exciting for us, because I think he achieved everything else he said he's going to do, and the time scale he's going to do it. So there's no reason to believe he can't go even further.
No, you're spot on. I think he's found his perfect match, as has Celtic, in Ange Postecoglou. We're going to be chatting about some of the other performances at the weekend and really leading up to our next game against St Mirren in the Cup. Joe Hamilton, welcome back to the show. Joe, you're commenting on YouTube. I can't see Ange's boys slipping up this season. Relentless. That's where you start a conversation around, can we actually do it? And I know what it's like in the Cups, Brian. I know anything can happen in a one-off game. It could be a number of bad performances, a bad pitch, poor referee decision. Let's not bring VAR into the equation. Anything can happen in one-off game. But we're playing in such a way that, if we don't take it the whole way and don't win a treble, I'll be really disappointed. Not because I feel entitled, because I actually think the play that we've had, the form that we've been showing, deserves it. I think that there's been teams in that quadruple treble who haven't shown the form that Ange's team has shown so far this season. So that would be my point. I would actually be disappointed, not because I'm an entitled Celtic fan who thinks, we deserve to win every single trophy. But if we play the way we're playing right now, it's a real possibility. And like what you've just said there, Ange comes in, he wins a double. If he was to win a treble this season, he's going to be looking at Europe. What can I do in Europe next season? And obviously what he's learned in the last two campaigns, hopefully we can learn from the mistakes that we've made over the last two, because there's been a few in Europe. We know that. Jungle Lion, always a pleasure. And yes, we do have a shirt for you. I have not forgotten. Things in the studio have been a wee bit busy, but I always write things down. I'm old-fashioned in that sense. I write things down, never forget. I do tick them off eventually. Ruthless and relentless is a serious commodity. Ange has it in abundance. He does, and it comes back to that ambition that you were talking about. And this as well, this is interesting. We've never spoke about this too much this season, Joe. Ange gets his teams to peak in the final part of the season. We spoke a lot about that last time round, and that's exactly what happened. We had to go on this incredible run to win the league, and that's exactly what we did. What show are we in for? there's a few points we're going to be talking about, Joe, that kind of brings that in, because we do have a starting lineup, and Brian and I could probably say, well, I think this player should start and this one shouldn't. But I think most of us have a starting lineup, which is the core group of players. But I think that there's another group of players just under the radar at the moment. And I'm not talking O'Reilly, Abada and Turnbull, because they're obviously in Ralston, who are not getting as much game time as they would like. But that other group of players that were brought in, Brian, who, we've not seen a great deal of them, like Haksabanovic, Iwata, Kobayashi, and O. So I think that if you're talking about a second half of the season momentum or even an improvement in what we're doing, I think those players are going to play a huge part in this. We've not seen a great deal of any of them, but what do you make of that? The fact that, you know what, we can go again, because the minute someone starts dipping, we've got this group of players on the bench now who are willing to learn, they're willing to make an impact, they're dying to get on the park and get some minutes. And it's that group that I think are going to be huge in the second half of the season.
Absolutely massive. And, we use Aaron Moy as an example. When he came in, I know everything he's basically undroppable now, and you look at his performance yesterday and his goal, which I don't think we spoke about enough. That was incredible finish for Moy. But he took a while to get set. He didn't have a great couple of first appearances. He had a shocker against St Mirren, if you remember. So, it pays to give these players the time to bed in. And I think, when Ange feels they're ready, they'll come in. Liam, our man from Japan, Acsom's own Liam, he reckoned that Kobayashi is going to be the main centre-back next to Carter Vickers next season. He thinks he's an exceptional prospect. And these guys are getting bedded in to a challenge for play. And I think McGregor will be challenged. Clearly Ange, rates him incredibly highly as a player, as a captain. But I think if Callum goes off the boil, we'll say, I don't think he'll hesitate and drop him if Iwata's sitting there chomping at the bit to start. And I don't think that's something we should. I think that's incredibly exciting, because it, as I keep saying, it makes people go that stage further.
Mm-hmm.
And just mention the another level stuff and talking about Europe. Remember as well, McGregor was missing for a lot of the games in Europe. O'Reilly was out of position in that thing. Plus, we get into next season more experienced, we have a better squad, more consistent. It's greater strength and depth. There's nothing, and even with that campaign, we never won any games. But you can imagine in a sliding door scenario, a bit more clinical in front of goal from everyone, not just any one player. It could be a completely different campaign because the performances were there, and the games were amazing to watch. So you imagine that next season, but we're that bit better with that much better squad. Mm-hmm. It's such an exciting time. And the other thing that Joe mentioned about, if you look at comparisons to last season in terms of how we ramped up, that really began after the League Cup final.
Yeah.
For then on, it was, there was almost no doubt. There's always a little bit of doubt because you do get scared, before any game. I think still got a wee bit of that tingling in your stomach because you think, oh, I know we should win, but keeping on, it's incredibly exciting time to be part of this experience and watching it. And I think, as I mentioned right at the start, I think you sometimes maybe don't appreciate it quite as much until you take a step back and actually go, wait a minute, look at how we are playing. Look at where we were 18 months ago. This is a pretty special time, I think.
Yeah, that is a big part of that. What Joe said there, the second half of the season coming into our own, big part of that was how well Ange played the January transfer market, I felt. And last season also we had players that came into their own kind of later on in the season. I think Giacomakis was one of those players. So when we look at this campaign and we look at that list of players that I've mentioned who are already in the building but not really getting game time at the moment, Haksabanovic, Kobayashi, Iwata and the Giacomakis of last season is the Moy of this season, this player who's coming into his own kind of later on in the season. And I thought Aaron Moy again was fantastic. He was absolutely superb at the weekend. And he's now looking at just some of the general stats, 6 goals in 9 games. Brian, astonishing return. And I keep saying this, but Matt O'Reilly is now second choice there. He definitely is now the second choice. And he'll be asking himself.
It pains me to agree, but you're right. It hurts me, but you're right.
It is. And I was looking at him on the touchline. I don't think anybody in that dugout is going to be throwing toys at the pram, because they've seen what happens if you try and do that. If you're going to be a Julien or a Giakoumakis, you won't be at the club. They'll move you on, and then someone else will gladly take that seat in the dugout to try and prove yourself as a first-team pick. The thing with O'Reilly, I felt nothing had really gone wrong for Matt O'Reilly since he came to Celtic. He was the surprise signing in the January transfer window, I think. I didn't know a great deal about the 3 Japanese players, but they weren't surprises because of Ange's knowledge of the Japanese game. Matt O'Reilly came in, and you kind of looked at him as a bit of a wild card. But between January and the end of the season, he impressed. This season, I felt that the fact that he adapted to playing a more deeper role, and particularly in Europe, Brian, like you mentioned, I thought he was having a fine season. A big part his game last season, I think, was his shooting ability, his ability to get a goal. That's not been there this season. But I thought he was having a decent enough campaign, although he started dipping in his form just prior to Moy coming back in. And I think he's still learning. He's only 22, Brian. A wee dip in form at Celtic, but it doesn't make him a bad player. Matt O'Reilly could be a star between now and the end of the season. We don't know how it's going to develop. But it is interesting that Joe mentioned it. But Aaron Moy, I mean, we keep saying it. We talk about him week on week now, about a player who, he came in without a blaze of glory when we signed him. He was quite a low-key signing. Never played much football last season. He's gone to the World Cup. He's come back like a guy that's been, injected with the Moy of old, getting in amongst the goals, playing passes, Brian, that, are cutting through defences. And at this moment in time, and I keep saying that because I know Ange plays to the moment, at this moment in time, he is a certain starter for me for Celtic.
Yeah, he certainly is. I mean, I think if you look at, when you talk about, right, see when you talk about players out of form, right, and it goes back to the Kyogo thing, Matt O'Reilly's still got the most assists in the league, right? And you would say he's out of form. But it's true. But that's the bar set.
He even got one yesterday.
Brilliant. And then if Moy comes in, and it's just, as you say, 6 goals in 9. I mean, incredible stuff. If you're a man for rewinding the tape sometimes and looking at past things. I remember when Moy was coming in, and we're talking about, is this a gamble? Is this ambitious? Is it? And I said at the time, I went, outside of Celtic, he'd be the best. He's the best passer in the league. I went, if you take him in isolation outside of their squad at the time, we're getting him for free. I went, he'd be the best passer in anyone else's team comfortably. Yeah. And you look at his range of passing now in our team, and the way he's doing it, he's so clever. Just goes about his business. He likes a bit of dig as well. I mean, he's a really quiet guy. He's probably the least engaging talker I've ever seen. His interviews are interesting watch, but a wee bit of a difficult watch at times because that's not his style. But he's not like that in the park. He's no shy. He likes to tackle. He can get himself about. And I think he's such a clever player that he's got the same thing as Turnbull in a way, in that he's not got the most dynamic physicality. He's not the fastest player. He's not going to throw himself around all the place. But he's so clever, he doesn't need to. He's just in the positions at the right time. He can calm things down. He looks things in passes that other people can. And as I say, you talk about goals. I mentioned that again. That goal yesterday was incredible. Just that finish was absolutely top level.
Oh, it was tremendous. You're talking there about the anticipation, the positional sense of a player, Brian. Sometimes people think, oh, he's in the right place at the right time. No, that's part of his game. That's a talent. It's a skill that not all players have got. And I think sometimes players like Moy, who might lack the pace, have learned to adapt to that. And that's why they anticipate things better. That's why they find themselves in positions, because it's been part of their game that they've required to enhance over the years. Maybe having that yard a wee bit less than your counterpart. I think what he's done since Ange's brought him in, but particularly since the World Cup, has been phenomenal. And I love seeing, even if I did criticise the signing, which I didn't at the time, I just thought it was quite low key, it was low risk. I didn't criticise the signing at the time. But even if I did, I'd be the happiest Celtic fan in the world that he's proved me wrong. And that's the big thing as well. If a player comes in and you're not sure of them, it's tremendous to see them proving people wrong. And he is proving a lot of folk wrong. You say I like rewinding the tape. I do like rewinding the tape. And I remember the season of 1997-98 with bit of fondness, let's just say. We were in a really transitional stage at Celtic, but there was this big thing hanging over us whereby Rangers had won 9 in a row and we had to stop them from winning 10. We brought in someone who was criticised largely in the media, Wim Jansen. They obviously didn't do their research on the guy and his achievements within football. Wim Jansen, of course, had played for Feyenoord against Celtic in 1970 when they beat us in the European Cup final. And there were some parallels last season to Wim Jansen's season. The job that had to get done, the turnaround that was required, the fact that we win that League Cup that kind of galvanises the team. We did that in Wim Jansen's season against Dundee United. Well, Wim Jansen sadly passed away recently, and there's a fantastic book in his name that I would recommend everybody to go and read as well. But the team is getting back together. The old gang, the band are getting back together, Brian. And we've got a couple of VIP meet and greet tickets to give away this week. So we're going to be promoting them every day this week. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to have some members of that team on the Acsom Bulletin. Guys like Simon Donnelly, for example. We might have someone like Harold Bratback on the show. Morten Vikhorst might pay us a wee visit as well. We're going to have a few of the team that stopped the 10, the Smell the Glove team. We're going to have them on the show as we're promoting this gig for the team at One Star. And I think that the tribute evening is well timed because obviously it is the anniversary of us winning that particular league in May 2023. Can you believe it's been 25 years, Brian? Deary me. I'm reminded on a daily basis how old I am. But that does make me feel old. 25 years since we stopped the 10. And the actual event's going to be at the SEC Armadillo on Friday, the 12th of May. Tickets are available on the link underneath this video. But we're going to be giving away a couple of VIP meet and greet. Can you imagine if Henrik Larsson's part of this event and you get a chance to meet the guy? Wow.
It's incredible. It's just, it's iconic stuff, and it's real, like, special people.
Oh, I know. I do still get nervous, Brian. I get nervous about meeting people like that. And obviously Martin O'Neill's in that category. I'm going to get nervous the night I meet him at the end of this month. But if you want to get involved in that competition, all you need to do is subscribe to Acsom. Simple as that. I know that most of you, actually I say that, 55% of the viewers today will be subscribers, and we have over 700 live at the moment. 55% of you will subscribe to the channel on YouTube. It's free. All you do, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, and you're in the draw for 2 VIP meet and greet tickets for that sensational night in May. If you've already subscribed, you're already in the draw. Don't worry. Don't unsubscribe and then subscribe. Everybody that's in there is in the draw. Talking to Martin O'Neill, he's watching the show. The Celtic Steamroller gathering serious pace now, boys and girls. It does feel that way. We're averaging over 3 goals a game domestically, Brian. It's unbelievable. And here we go. If I wasn't going to say it, Paddy's going to say it. Welcome back. Not to get ahead of us, but I think the treble is on. People don't like talking like that, Brian. They get superstitious. Don't mention it because it won't happen if you mention it and all that stuff. But what I'm seeing at the moment is I'm seeing a group of players, as I say, the core group, who are all hitting form at the right time. You've got guys like O'Reilly and Turnbull with still a point to prove. They want to get back in the team. Abada, I mean, he was unbelievable last season. He's not really playing as much this season. Ralston, who could play for any other team in the league. And you've got this group of players that are just bubbling under the surface, and then you've got almost the third group of players who haven't yet had an opportunity to shine. But one of the players you mentioned earlier, Jota, I don't think he's at his best yet, but I'll tell you what, he was involved. And that chance he had, the move started with Joe Hart. It ends with Jota hitting the bar. And it took me back to the goal that Dembele scored up at McDermott, where I think every player on the park, every Celtic player on the park touched the ball. There was something like, was it 23 passes? And there was a Rabona and Lustig, and obviously Dembele scored the goal. And I was thinking back to that. I thought to myself, if this nestles in the back of the net, it's going to be up there. And he's the type of player, Brian, that even if he's not having the best game in the world, he's capable of doing that thing there, that bit of magic, the game-changing magic. And I do think that he's had a bit of illness, a wee bit of loss of form, but I do think that we're seeing a wee bit of the Jota of old. He could be coming back to his best in the weeks to come.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys that you kind of, it's almost the same way I would think about Hatate, in that I think I would always start a Jota, a player like that. Same with Hatate. They just have that moment, even if they can be quiet during games, but they're so inventive and so clever and so brave in terms of what they try. I remember we mentioned Gordon Strachan earlier. One of the things I always loved Gordon Strachan saying is that I think he was talking about Sean Maloney, and he says bravery isn't guys at 6'5" sliding into tackles and kicking people. He says bravery is getting the ball and trying something that nobody else is willing to try and risking it going wrong. Just taking that extra risk, and guys like Hatate and certainly Jota have that. So I mentioned him at the start. He was in and out of the game yesterday at points, but still he's got just that bit of thing you can never quite predict. And if you're playing against that and your back's against the wall and you've got a player like that in your team, it's just magic. And let's be honest, it's just incredible to watch. Like, if you're an old school Celtic romantic like myself, and I'm sure you and certainly a few others, you love the wingers, you love these guys with just that bit of magic inventiveness. It's great to watch. I actually think Haksabanovic is a bit like that. I think he's got that wee kind of spark of creativeness as well. Yeah, but say Jota and Hatate, they're just guys that are capable of so much, and it's wonderful to see, especially when they're still really young as well. As you see, they're probably nowhere near where they're going to be, which is incredible to think.
It is. And just last week I was talking about Rio Hatate as being the complete footballer, and I still one, performance against St Johnstone's not going to change my mind against that. You've got a player in Hatate, like you say, who's still getting to his best. Jota, I still believe, is going to get to his best. And I don't know if you're good at lip reading, but there was a moment where obviously he's known for being a dirty player, Jota, and he was done for persistent fouling yesterday because he's such a dirty player as Jota. And there's a bit, if you watch it back, Callum McGregor gives him a wee word of advice. And if you're good at lip reading, it's worth a giggle. Watch it back. Danny. Dearie me, I have got bad eyes, but that's taking the biscuit. Danny Riley, sorry. The standard of football played in Scotland is frighteningly similar every week. How can we progress against this type of opposition? Although I understand your point, Danny, there's been occasions where we have had by and far the biggest budget to go and buy players, and we've not been able to put that game to bed, Brian. We've not been able to go to McDermott and win 4-1. So, albeit you might criticise the standard of opposition, you've still got to do the job. And previously, we've not always done that job. And I think that you can't take away the performances and the accolades and the achievements of Ange's team, like yesterday and over the several months that they've been on this run, because of the nature of the opponents in front of you.
Of course you can. And I think actually, if you look at how, to Danny's point there about the improvement, look at it's the first time we played Livingston under Ange, or the first couple of times we played them actually. Just couldn't break them down. Just really struggled with them in particular, and it was a thing. And as well as we played, there were times where we couldn't quite get over the line. Whereas now, and I say I thought St Johnstone actually defended pretty well. I thought they played pretty well in general, to be fair to them, but as you say, we've improved to the point where we can solve these puzzles. We can find these little gaps and breakaways. And I think almost more importantly is the resiliency and the belief that we're going to. The player never seems in doubt. You never see Ange in the touchline screaming for people to drive forward and shouting the ball on. He's got the faith and the composure that these guys will find a way to win. You saw it the amount of times we scored late. I think it was the game, was it Dundee United at Parkhead? It was 2 each with like 5 minutes to left. We won 4-2. It's just the players just had that extra gear, and you can see they thoroughly believe, no, we're winning this game. And you mentioned Hatate. One of the things that I think he's improved upon this season is that there's been games where we have been a wee bit, no lacklustre, but maybe just up against a very, very stubborn opponent. And guys like Hatate, not just McGregor, guys like Hatate are really taking the game by the scruff of the neck and saying, no, we're not losing today. We're driving in, we're winning, and that's it. And it's fantastic. And that mental thing has to be built. And I think going back to the point about Europe, was what Ange said. He said, these guys that's first experience there, next time they'll know better and they'll be better and they'll believe they can perform at that level.
Yeah.
And it's great to see it. And it is kind of tangible. You can sort of see the players going, no, here we go. And you see the amount of players now pointing to where they want the ball and get more confident with each other. There's real leadership in the squad. I think even Joe Hart gave Jota a row for when he went off the park as well, because he went off at the back instead of going over. things like that. And I love to see that in the squad, because it's a squad of players that are so proud in their own professionalism and style of playing and success, but that fits for the entire team. And it comes for Ange. You see him in the touchline and he hardly moves. I think the only time he moved yesterday was to pick up the ball. And then again, he gave the fourth official a bit of row because the guy took the throw in about 6 feet further away than when he picked up the ball. Which is quite funny actually, when you saw Ange saying, he's there, I've just picked it up for here, he's over there. It's good to see. And that confidence got to filter through.
No, you're right. Again, we're going back to a discussion that we've had not only today but previously, Brian, about the culture of the football club. Spoke about it 2 seasons ago because there was an issue with it. And I watched recently a fascinating interview actually with Rio Ferdinand, who's got a lot of time for Celtic, and Paul McStay in particular. And he was talking about how the culture started at Manchester United under Alex Ferguson, got to a point where the club drives the culture rather than the players. So the players have got to buy into it. It's there. It's embedded in the club. But it has to start somewhere. And it started, obviously, with Man United. It started with Alex Ferguson. And then part of that culture is a winning mentality also. But it was a lot of the small things at the club that had to be right. And he was talking about, getting 1,000 things right every single day. Creates a culture at a football club. And I think in the past, we've probably been in a situation where there's been a group of players who have driven the culture rather than the other way about. And often what happens there is the thing breaks down. There's been a lot of talk about how that affected Ronnie Dyler's second season, for example, Brian, where there was a group of players who didn't buy into his system methods. And, we still won the league. We were still good enough to win the league. However, I think that Aberdeen fans probably look back on that as an opportunity missed because we weren't great that season. And then I think maybe in the last 18 months or maybe the last year under Neil Lennon, there was that shift as well where there was a group of players kind of driving the dressing room, driving the culture of the club rather than the other way about. So to come in and have the strength to absolutely overturn that and get it back to winning ways. And it's not just, winning football games. It's, as I say, that 1,000 things you do right every single day as a manager and as a football club. And then anybody coming into that, they've got to buy into the culture. They just won't last. And I think that, when we look at people like, let's say, Giakoumakis, maybe he wasn't part of that. Maybe that's the reason he hasn't lasted. There's maybe a backstory to players who come and go as quickly as they have done. Looking at Maurice Jens and his reaction to leaving Celtic, it sounds as though he did buy into it. And he was blown away with the support in the stadium and the experience of it. But there's just this wee niggling doubt about Giakoumakis now in my mind about not buying into what Ange was selling. And I just mentioned it as well regarding the Instagram posts and all that kind of stuff, something that obviously has rankled with him a wee bit. We spoke about David Turnbull in a previous show. I'm going to speak about him again. But before I do this, you and I were talking about this. It's been mentioned in the group chat as well. The breaking news from Plunge McNugget in relation to Man City being charged for something like 100 breaches of financial fair play. And I think that it's an interesting development because of the way that the league have dealt with it, Brian. But also it's something that can be driven by the highest corridors of football. It's something that we as a football nation have lacked, I think, that level of leadership and action when it comes to financial fair play. So I don't know, do you think it might be a watershed? Do you think there's going to be other clubs sitting this morning thinking, I hope we're not next?
There should be, is the answer. There should be clubs thinking, we better watch what we're doing. It will remain to be seen if that's the case. And you need to understand as well, this investigation has been going on for 4 years.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's not just, somebody's found out about this season. It's came to like this, I think it's been ongoing. So you don't know how many other clubs are facing similar sort of investigations. I think, with Man City, it just shows that, we spoke about our managers outside of Celtic have spoken about how Celtic are very lucky with their budgets and similar such nonsense. And we've often said, just having the biggest budget, it's about how you spend it and, how you've earned it. And, you can't buy success. Man City spent £1 billion and they've still not won a European Cup. They've not won the league, or probably not won the league this year. And I think sometimes it's about dealing with it, properly. And I think that Jim and I spoke about if there was a European Super League and Celtic were asked to join. And I think Jim made a very good point, as he's wanting to do. And he said, well, would you be happy if a Celtic player was on 150 grand a week and we're spending 107 million pound on a player for midfield?
Mhm.
We know he wouldn't, because it's no us. And I think sometimes when you're a club sort of outside that EPL bubble and you see Man City getting charged, and you think, do you know what? Good, because it's took the fun out of football a bit. You know, the amount of money in it these days, it is ridiculous, really, when you think about it. I mean, Chelsea there, they spent nearly £500 million in January, in players. 450 million they spent. They're sitting mid-table. I mean, it's staggering money. And if these clubs aren't getting investigated, they should be. And that's for all clubs, not just in England.
Yeah, I totally agree with it. It's when you look at the preposterous money levels of cash that's getting thrown about by football clubs, particularly when this was and always was meant to be the game of the working classes, Brian. You know, and working class people are struggling day to day, and like you say, that kind of money, you can't even imagine what that money looks like. And you know, the English game at the moment, if you look at the other big leagues, often cited as the big six in European football, it's English. It's the English Premiership that's spending all the money. There's a lot of other clubs that are having to become far more creative and far better with their recruitment. And I think that I take great pleasure from the way that Celtic have done this. You know, he's lucky that he's got all this money to spend. Well, just look at the facts, because the way that he's spent the money, and also Celtic, as a football club, are not entitled to have 54,000 season ticket holders, Brian. They're not entitled to have money in the bank. Nobody gave them it. There wasn't a magic wand. I always go back to the Ferguson McCann takeover almost being, you know, ground zero when it came to financial clout, because Celtic had none leading up to that. None. You know, they didn't have a board that could build a stadium in line with the Taylor report. Everything that the club across the city were doing, Celtic couldn't do it at the time. And by the way, I'm glad they weren't prepared to do some of it, but they certainly couldn't do what any other club were doing that was spending money. They were in debt. You look at a situation with Brian McClare, who we spoke to a couple of weeks ago, where we bought him from Motherwell for 70 grand, right? And at that time, and I've interviewed Tom Grant, for example, who was on the Celtic board in the 1980s. If Celtic bought a player, it's because they had the money. They had the money in the bank and they went and bought a player with it. There was no debt. They didn't have any debt at that point. And that player, Brian McClare, that was purchased for 80 grand, we had just sold someone who came through the ranks in Charlie Nicholas for 750k, right? You know, and then we buy an 80k player, and 4 years later, we sell that 80k player for, once again, 750k. So you've made £1.5 million. Where did it go? What did they do? You know, the financial mismanagement of the previous regime was amateurish at best. But since McCann takes over, Celtic have had a generation of running the football club properly, and the recruitment we've not always got it right. But in terms of a balance sheet, Brian, we've done it. We've done our business correctly, and particularly since Ange's come in, the business we've done has been very, very shrewd. When you've got someone like Liam talking about Kobayashi potentially being you know, a first choice pick for Japan at the next World Cup. And we picked that player up for zero. It's astonishing. Haksabanovic, £1.5 million. You know, Matt O'Reilly, £1.5 million. I'm talking about players who have got sell-on value. And that's the model that I think that we're implementing better. It's always been there, but we're just doing it a lot better, as you've often said. But one player that I have raised previously, you know, in relation to where he is right now in his career and his Celtic career, is David Turnbull at 23. And at this moment in time, I think he's in a similar boat to Lila Bada, age 21, Matt O'Reilly, age 22, where these guys are going to be itching for game time every week. They're young, they're at a different stage of their career than, let's say, James Forrest, and even Aaron Moy. You know, when he's not picked, Brian, he'll sit on that bench and he'll go on when he's called upon. It's a bit like Jamesy Forrest. And even although the age is more similar, you know, Tony Ralston's like that, you know, absolute low maintenance players. But David Turnbull wants game time. So since returning from his suspension after that sending off, he's had 1 start, 6 substitute appearances, and he scored 3 goals. I think you can throw an assist in there as well. But what I find astonishing is that he's only played 154 minutes since he came back from that suspension, which is a goal every 51 minutes that he's scored. And my big question would be, how does he break in? Now, I know it's simple to say when he gets his chance, take it. Do what Aaron Moy's done. But how can he do it to Aaron Moy when Aaron Moy's keeping out Matt O'Reilly? At the moment, I think it's a big task for Turnbull. I would love him to do it. I think he's a phenomenal talent. But where is he right now, and how does he break into the side, Brian?
So I think with Turnbull particularly, I've said a lot, I think he's an exceptional footballer. I think he's actually a far better footballer than any of us realise at this stage. And I just think that it's testament to the squad, because he's not done anything wrong. It's just that he's hard to dislodge the players above him. Mm-hmm. But I think it's been shown that he can, and that if he's, if Ange feels that the players above him dip, he will get a chance to go in. It's whether he can sort of believe in that and think, right, am I going to wait my turn, or am I going to have to look to move? I think it's interesting as well, players' mentality around it, because do they just shrug their shoulders and say, well, I'm not playing, so I'm going to move over, or do they roll their sleeves up and try and fight for it? And I think the key distinction is the fact that Ange has shown that if players are playing better than the one that's starting, then they'll start. And you need to remember as well, is apart from what David Turnbull's contributed this season, he was a mainstay for Ange at first. I think he played almost every game under him until he got injured, and Hatate and O'Reilly came in.
Yeah.
So, he's been a very, very key part of Ange's success. Let's not be any doubt about it. And I think that, as you say, it's no simple as saying just taking your chance. I think it depends what his attitude's like. But if he keeps doing what he's doing, it means Hatate has to be at the top of his game, because if he dips, Turnbull's right there waiting, and I think that's a huge motivator. And just a final point, just on you talked about the success with Celtic, the financials and stuff like that. Ange, as he often does, put it spectacularly, and I think he said something like, there's 60,000 people come here every week. They spend their hard-earned cash just to watch us play, because we're the biggest club in the country. He says, and that's why we've got the most money. He says, it's up to me, my job is to A, reward them, and B, maximise it. And that's luck's got nothing to do with it. And he's absolutely spot on. And I just think it's one of those things that we forget sometimes. And I know people have a go at me sometimes because I tend to defend Peter Lawwell, but for all the limitations, all the things that maybe you could say against them, we've had an incredibly successful financial period since he's come in. There can be no doubt about that. It's been well managed, and you look at the players Ange's have signed compared to the players got out, and we're still in profit. And each of these players has made a measurable difference to Celtic Football Club as a whole. So the system's playing well, and you got to give credit where it's due. And I think it's two very important things.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we kind of got bogged down, I think, talking about the two players who were going to be departing, who were part of the first team squad, Juranovic and Giakoumakis. And we're talking about the transfer fees within a show, and how, Celtic have to kind of stand up to these teams when it comes to the actual transfer fees that we're going to get. But when you look at it, in isolation, and you look at the ages of the players as well, it's still good business, Brian. The fact that we've made a profit on these two guys in a very short space of time. And that profit is then, put into other players that, there's a huge sell-on value because of their age. And the group of players we've brought in, and you look at their ages on average, it's low. They could be at Celtic for 3 years, 2.5 years, 2 years, and then you sell them on for a massive profit. They've done the business really, really well. And I think there's also been a bit of ambition. We can't take that away. When you look at, going back to, it's easy to forget, going back to pre-season, and we had 2 loan players. We had 3 at Maeda as well, but that was an obligation to buy. But we had 2 loan players in Carter Vickers and Jota that, it was going to set us back about 13 million quid just to buy them. And then you've obviously got the packages for each individual player. And we were talking on this show about which one would you prefer? Because there's no way we're going to get 2 of them. But there was a huge bit of ambition shown there, I think, and a bit of belief in Ange and what Ange is building, that we went out there and we actually did purchase the 2 players. And I always remember getting, talking about Edward, for example. Oh, was he worth 9 million quid when we signed him? Well, if you sold him the following day, you would get your 9 million quid back. So yeah, he is worth it. And it's a bit like that with Carter Vickers and Jota. I think Carter Vickers has already improved this season. I think Jota's got it in him to improve on the player that we signed at the beginning of the season. So there's also been ambition there. And when we put money into a player like Starfelt, 4.5 million quid, and also Kyogo, roughly the same fee, we have spent big when it's been required. But I think some of the business we've been doing in the lower ends, £1 to £2 million has been absolutely superb. Talk of a treble is on. Talk of Celtic. Here we go, Grant. I'll need to check the figures. If we win the treble, we will go level with the old Rangers and the new Rangers. Total trophy haul. Wow. Interesting. I'll have a wee look at that. What have we won? We've won 40 Scottish Cups, 20 League Cups, a European Cup, 52 leagues. So that could all change at the end of the season. And by the way, I'll be in for that, and Acsom will be streaming live for it as well. If you want to support the channel, give us a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. And also, we've got tickets available for the one-star event that's happening in May, and Alan Thompson at Gracie's. All that's left for me to say is thank you once again, Brian Degnan, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.